Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. I'm Lindy and I read a lot. So the kinds of books that I read are the kinds of books I'm going to be talking about today. World literature, queer books, indigenous literature, graphic novels, and I'm also going to be talking about some award lists that were just announced recently, and movie adaptations. That is new for me. I very rarely watch movies. And a little bit about knitting. I finally finished this scarf, which I started knitting last spring on a visit to Victoria with my sister. And now I am living here in Victoria and I finally finished this project. And I'm really happy with it, but it is too warm for today, so I don't need to be wearing it. Just give you a closer look. I got that ribbed effect by using a garter stitch in the variegated wool, and the black is Kiviot and it's in stocking stitch. So it's very cushy and soft. Very, very happy with the results. Somebody asked me in the comments recently if I listen to audiobooks while I knit. Melanie, that was you. Anyway, the answer is yes, very much so. The most recent audiobook that I've been listening to when I finished knitting this scarf is Deluge by Stephen Markley. It is a really long one. It's nearly 41 hours long, so I'm not yet finished the audiobook. I'll probably talk about it next week. Okay, so movies. I think it was just last week that I talked about A Jest of God by Margaret Laurence. I liked that book so much that I sought out the movie. It was available on YouTube. The name of the film is Rachel, and it stars Joanne Woodward. The book was published in 1966 and the movie came out in 1968. And it is so much a depiction of the 60s. So for example, there's a scene where a woman has had an operation and you see her recovering in hospital and she's smoking a cigarette. There's another patient in the bed next to her. Yeah, times were very different back then. I also was curious about how they would portray some of the other sort of groundbreaking content of that novel, which is very feminist. And the lesbian character in the movie is done very well too. I quite liked that representation. Anyway, the other movie that I watched after reading a book is Crane's Cafe by Cora Sandel. No, that's the book. It was originally written in Norwegian, Crane's Konditori, and the movie version that I found online did not have English subtitles, so I watched the whole thing in Norwegian. The thing about the book is that there's some great dialogue, so of course I didn't catch any of that from the movie other than, the please and thank you and the names of the characters. But there were some really funny scenes, including where in the cafe the workers there all listen at the door to the next room to find out what's going on there. And I'll just show you a still from that movie so you can see what I mean. The thing that I find really interesting is that both of these books and movies feature women who are so different from the other women around them, or they don't fit into society. They're in a small town where the attitudes are very narrow-minded and old-fashioned, and they're fighting against that. And I guess I like that kind of book. And even, I guess I could say I like that kind of movie too. This hasn't converted me into a a dedicated movie watcher, but it's interesting sometimes to compare and see how one format is translated to another. I have to keep pausing because there are some very noisy vehicles going up and down the street, and that's unusual. The street's usually pretty quiet. I shall soldier on. The American Library Association has youth media awards every year, and there are big name medals that I'm sure you've heard about, like the Newbery Award and the Caldecott Medal, but there are so many other categories, and this is a great way to discover children's literature. When I looked through the list, there were upwards of 20 that I had read, but there are many others that I want to explore further. So I'm going to talk about some standouts of books that I've read and mentioned on this channel, including one that was in my top 10 books of 2023, and that is the graphic memoir, The Talk by Darren Bell. In the ALA Awards, it was in the Alex Awards, that's the 10 best adult books for teen readers. Definitely concur. The picture book that won the Caldecott Medal is Big by Vashti Harrison, and that one came close to my best list last year as well. One that I've talked about recently that a number of you have mentioned you're interested in or have started reading is Eagle Drums by the Inupiaq writer Nasugrak Rainey Hobson, and that was a Newbery honor. I talked about Pardalita, which was translated from Portuguese by Lynn Miller Lachman. The graphic novel is written by Joana Estrella, and that one won a Bachelor honor. I think it was just last week that I talked about Alebrijes by Donna Barba Higuera, and that one got a Pura Belpré honor. On the Yalsa Award for Excellence in Nonfiction, one of the titles is From Here by Luma Moufle. It's a memoir of a lesbian who grew up in Jordan and realized that she could not be herself and still live in her country because of the persecution of gays and lesbians there. So she moved to the US. It's excellent. In the Asian Pacific American category, there are a couple of books that I want to mention. Both of them are honor books. In Limbo by Deb J.J. Lee and Parachute Kids by Betty Tang. And both of those happen to be in graphic novel format. And speaking of graphic novels, this is another one that I've talked about recently, Courage to Dream, Tales of Hope in the Holocaust. It's by Neil Schusterman with illustrations by Andres Vera Martinez. And my YA book club is going to be discussing that later on today, so I'm looking forward to that. It's a great book. It was an honor book in the Sidney Taylor category, and Neil Schusterman himself also got some kind of lifetime achievement recognition. And I think the book that I want to read most after going through the list, I'll include a link below for you to see yourself. There's so many books on this list, but the one I want to read the most is Mexikid by Pedro Martin. It's a memoir and also graphic novel format. It looks fabulous. I have kind of been eyeing it already, but it was recognized in multiple categories. I know it's going to be fabulous. Another award list that was just recently announced is the Dublin Literary Award. That's sponsored by the Dublin libraries, and all of the books on this list are nominated by libraries around the world. There are 70 books on the long list. I will include a link below, and I will also link to a couple of booktubers who've already talked about the long list, so I'm not going to mention all the titles on the list myself. Eric Carl Anderson and Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot did a great job of introducing the award and some of the titles that interest them, so check out their videos if you haven't already. There'll be links in the description box down below. One of the books that is on that Dublin Award long list is this one that I've just finished reading. It's called Stolen by Ann-Helen Laestadius. It's translated from Swedish by Rachel Willson-Broyles. So this is a Sámi story. They are an indigenous people in northern Scandinavia, and the author is part Sámi. And the central character in here is 9 years old when we meet her, and she witnesses her reindeer being murdered by someone that she recognizes. But this man threatens to kill her if she says anything, and she doesn't. But fast forward through the years, and the reindeer continue to be killed. The police don't do anything about it. Her frustration grows, and we see her as she gets older and comes to terms with what to do about the hatred, the bullying that the kids experience at school, the general hatred of Sámi in the area, and all of that persecution just sounds so sadly familiar, knowing what I do about Indigenous experience in Canada and other parts of the world. One thing I want to warn you about before going into this book is there are reindeer that are tortured, and if you can't take reading those kinds of passages, this might not be the book for you. But for the Sámi people, the reindeer are like members of their family, and that just comes through so strongly. I really, really love this book, and I highly recommend it. Next up is another book by an Indigenous author from a northern part of the world. This is Last Night in Nuuk. It's by Niviaq Korneliussen. I think I said that right. This is a Greenlandic Inuit author, and her characters are mostly Greenlandic Inuit as well. We see, I think, 5 different characters. Yeah, 5 different characters, and many of them are queer. So, young queer people out on the town, falling for each other, communicating through texts. There's a lot of drinking and a lot of drama. I found this so different from the run-of-the-mill 20-somethings out on the town kind of story. You can see I have many passages that have been flagged in this book, and that's because my Lesbian Plus book club is going to be discussing it this upcoming Monday. It's character-based and just absolutely fascinating. I really liked it, and I can't quite compare it to anything else that I've read. Oh, and I forgot to mention, it is translated from Danish by Anna Halagar. Next up is Riambel by Priya, Hein. This is a novel set in Mauritius. The central character is 15-year-old Noemi, who's got dark skin, and her heritage is from people who were enslaved working in the sugar fields on the island of Mauritius. She lives in a shanty town with her mother. Her older sister is no longer with them, and that's part of the story as well. There's so much vivid emotion in this book, and it's a little one. It's really a novella, 160 pages, and it's written in fragments. I love books like that. So in addition to Noemi's first-person voice, we have poems and recipes and voices from women from the history of Mauritius, kind of haunting the present. And Noemi gradually becomes more outraged at the injustice that there is in her country, the white supremacy, the legacy of colonialism and slavery, the economic disparity, all of that. When I read this, I realized that I really appreciate books where there's a woman at the center of it who is angry because of injustice. And yeah, it's definitely the case here. It's also kind of dreamy and poetic. It's such a good mix. I just love the writing. I have to give you an example. Before I start reading, I'll just explain that Noemi has followed in her mother's footsteps, working for this rich family, a Franco-Mauritian family, the de Grandbourgs. They work as servants in the big house. The inside of the ancient church is always refreshingly cool after our walk under the burning sun. We're about to enter the building when we see a Franco-Mauritian family hovering nearby. Although we are a few steps ahead of them, Mama and I immediately step aside to let them through first, as is expected of us. They head straight for the front pews nearest to the altar, which are reserved for the whites, while we loiter towards the rear. A few seconds too late, we watch the last seats in the back row being taken by a family with two toddlers bouncing on a harassed-looking mother. From the corner of my eye, I see the de Grandbourg family already seated, right next to God, obviously, and every week it's the same routine. We pretend not to know each other and look the other way. "Never mind," whispers Mama. We remain standing throughout the entire service, despite the vacant places in front with the Blancs, who would never accept one of us sitting anywhere near them. "Ce ne se fait pas." Even after Mass, we wait patiently for them to leave the church first. All our lives, we've walked around them, on silent tiptoes, reverently, serving them, waiting on them. We're taught never to inconvenience them. They walk differently, with privilege. A sense of entitlement only reserved for the whites. Should they happen to walk in our direction, we quickly step back and let them go first. If we're waiting in a queue, they won't stand in line like the rest of us. Certainement pas. They'll always be served first. And that is Riambel by Priya, Hein. I picked this up because it was on the best books of 2023 lists of at least two booktubers that I follow. And those are Bob the Bookerer. He also did a standalone review of this book, so I will link that down below, and his Best of 2023 video. And also Ben Reads Good talked about this on his Best of 2023, so you can find his video below as well. Okay, from Sweden to Greenland to Mauritius to the United States. This next book is by a Taiwanese-American author, Victoria Ying.
Hungry Ghost. It's
autobiographical graphic novel about an eating disorder. In the author's notes at the end, she talks about her own experience with eating disorder. And this book is mostly aimed at teens, I think, but certainly anyone can get a good oversight of what it's like to deal with this kind of a mental health issue, starting from the time that the character in the book, Valerie, was a child, and her mother telling her not to eat her birthday cake, just taste, don't eat it, and how this has been a challenge for her as she grows up, and her relationship with her mother is a difficult one, but she always tries to be a good girl and to be obedient, and things all come to a head when there's a family tragedy, and she starts looking at herself and her body in a different way. I really love the art in this book. Here's a scene from an extended family gathering, a celebratory meal, and I think this is her aunt saying, "Don't forget to try some pig trotters. They're good luck. And the dumplings." But look how her mother is carefully watching what goes onto Valerie's plate. And Valerie thinking, I never know what I'm supposed to do. How am I supposed to be good? Do I eat or do I not eat? Here's another page from the book where the setting is established in the top panel. We see that they're in the school library. And one of Valerie's friends says, maybe UCLA will be my first choice. Another friend says, oh, me too. And her best friend, Jordan, says they've got a great law program and those football players are hot. And look how a football player going by is eyeing Jordan. And yet, Valerie doesn't see that, even though it's right in front of her. She says, poor Jordan, she's my favorite person in the whole world, but a football player wouldn't look at her twice. And things also come to a head in her friendship with Jordan. And from a Taiwanese American perspective to Taiwan itself. This is a biography. It's called The Boy from Clearwater, written by Pei-Yun and illustrated by Zhou Jian-Xin, translation by Lin King. Yu, the author, wrote in 3 different languages, Mandarin Chinese, Hoklo Taiwanese, and Japanese. And in the original, there are Mandarin Chinese translations for the languages that are not Chinese. And Lin King reads all 3 of those languages, so she went to the originals and translated to English from those. And in this book, those 4 languages are represented with different colors. It's brilliant. You can see the dark black is the Taiwanese, the gray is English, a really dark pink is the Mandarin Chinese, and the lighter pink is the Japanese. That's for part 1. This book is divided in 2, and in the first part, pink is the secondary color, and it's the style is very like pencil sketches. It's very delicate with a white background. And in the second part, the paper itself is gray, and the style of the art is more like lino block cuts with blue being the secondary color. The main character is Tsai Kun-lin. That's his name in Mandarin Chinese. His name is different in Taiwanese, and it's different in Japanese. So this complexity is captured in the graphic novel, as well as the multilingual necessity of the people there. And the necessity is because in the 20th century, momentous changes in the culture and politics and language went on in Taiwan. So Tsai Kun-lin was born in 1930. So prior to that, the Mandarin Chinese was the main language that was used, so for example, for his father. But around the time that he was born was when the island came under Japanese military rule, and so schooling and so on was in Japanese. And then at the end of World War II, the Kuomintang took over with a military dictatorship, and so many political prisoners were taken, including Tsai Kun-lin. And in his case, it was because when he was in school, he was in a book club. And that was enough for him to spend 10 years in prison. That is the second part of the book. And that part ends when he gets out of prison. There is a second volume in this biography that's coming out early this year, I think. And it will be the rest of his life, as far as I know. Tsai Kun-lin just died in 2023. So over the course of his life, he saw so many changes in the country of Taiwan. There's an excellent timeline at the back of the book as well, to follow the individual's history as well as what was happening on a larger scale in the country and in the world. Some background information, pretty much in the center of the book, talking about the heavy-handed policies of the Kuomintang. The policy was better to kill 100 innocents than to let one criminal escape, and carried out sweeping and intensive searches, frame-ups, arrests, interrogations, torture, forced confessions, and unjust military trials. Almost every week, people were shot on Taipei's Machangding execution grounds for false or erroneous charges. Here's a passage from the early part of the book. You can see the style. Kun-lim is 8th in a family of 10. He and his older brother quietly go upstairs to listen to the principal play records. Kun-lin loves music, and later we see him singing in Japanese a song that translates as "The red dragonflies in the red sunset." And his older brother says, "You sing it so often, but do you know what you're singing?" And he goes, "Nope." It's talking about dragonflies in the sunset. Tonbo means dragonflies. And then he shows him in the library a book where there's a dragonfly, and Kun-lin learns the word tombo. The library's extensive collections roused Kun-lin's curiosity. From that day on, he became an avid reader. as I mentioned, being in a book club was what got him into trouble. And I just want to mention one of those serendipitous things too, because when Kun Lim is in prison, where there's thousands of men being held on this small island, he suffers from malnutrition, and a doctor prescribes vitamin B and to stay out of the sunshine because Kun Lim develops pellagra and has this red rash. And in Riambel, there's a man that Noemi is talking to about his life as a child. When he was 11 years old, he was working in the cane fields, and he and his younger siblings all had pellagra. So, yeah, you know how that happens sometimes? Another example of that sort of serendipity, I didn't mention this when I talked about the book Brooms by Jasmine Walls and Theo Duval just last week, but there's a panel in there where James, who's a brickmaker or a bricklayer, is talking about how people don't want to build with bricks anymore. They want cheaper materials, even though they don't last as long. And a different book that I read recently, Whale by Chian Myung Kwan. The brickmaking is something that's really important in that book too, and how at a certain point in time people aren't so interested in building with bricks and they make do with cheaper materials. So yeah, these larger social and economic forces, I like seeing them turn up in the books that I read. Now, I've got one more book to tell you about, and I read this one in ebook format, so I don't have a copy to show you here. It's Death Valley by Melissa Broder. I picked this up because Renee of the Left-Handed Reader had it on her best books of 2023. I will link her video down below. And I copied down so many passages in my commonplace book. I love the writing so much. So this is a story set in the California desert. We've got a woman who is so full of grief. Her father is very ill in the hospital. Her husband is also very ill, and she is just having so much trouble coping. It's like she's run away and is hiding out at a Best Western and goes for a walk in the desert, finds a giant saguaro cactus, which should not even be growing there, but it's huge, and she manages to climb inside and experience some solace. It's kind of wacky, it's surreal, it's out there, but I also really loved it. It made me think about the proliferation of sad girl lit, where somebody has a mental breakdown, and she is having a breakdown, she's a mess, but she also talks about reading that kind of book, and here's a passage. The next book I read was a novel described as the tale of a woman unraveling after the death of her wife. All I could think was, who unravels this neatly? There was no mention of fear, zero messes or catharses. If a feeling did surface, it was an elegant dribble, pristine, assonant. Was this really the inside of a person's head? I've been more unraveled by a yeast infection. It was clear that the author had never herself unraveled. Also, she seemed to disapprove of humor in any form, which was another problem, because how could a person unravel so humorlessly and not die? If I saw no humor in my unraveling, I'd have been dead long ago. This book is so funny. Yeah. I want to keep reading passages, but I think you get the idea. It's an existential novel, and in fact, it reminded me of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince in that way. Not that it had themes of friendship, but definitely the weirdness, and the suffering, and the loneliness that just come through so strongly in this book. And also the passages where she's talking to a rose that's dying, and some pebbles where she gets some advice from them, and so on. Yeah, what can I say? I appreciate this kind of book. And that's all I've got for you today, so thank you very, very much for watching. Please let me know, have you read any of these? Do you plan to read any of these? How do you feel about sad girl lit? Sean, the book maniac, talked to Sarah from the Netherlands about this topic. That was a great zooming in conversation, and I am going to link that video down below for more context on this idea of sad girl literature, but you probably know what I'm talking about. Okay, now this is really goodbye now. I'm going to stop my blathering on. Thanks again, and please leave me some comments down below. Just say hello, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.